All right, so I'm just going to take you through a couple examples of completing the square, okay, because you're going to have to do this inside your quadratics. So if you are in quadratic form, which is this, and I want to get into standard form, one of the ways you could do it is complete the square. Well, to get into standard form, the only way is complete the square. Okay, to graph it, you can also do negative b over 2a. But if it says to get it into standard form, okay, so just a quick review of your steps. The first thing you're going to do is group the first two terms. So I can rewrite it, so it would be 2x squared plus 6x. I'm going to leave a space, I'm going to fill it, and I'm going to bump the 5 to the outside. Now in yesterday's example, there was nothing in front of the x squareds, right? This case is obviously different. If there's something in front of the x squared, we have to take it out. So I'm putting the 2 on the front of the parentheses, and by taking it out of the 2x squared, I also have to take it out of the 6x. So this would get divided by 2, and this would also get divided by 2. So this becomes x squared, and this becomes 3x. We'll leave the space because we still have to fill it in, plus 5 on the outside. Okay, so once you take it out, everybody's with me so far, right? Once I take it out, I go through the steps that I normally would to fill in the space in between, which is take that second term, which is a 3, divide it by 2, which this time it doesn't go in evenly, so it stays as a fraction, and then square it, which means I'm going to be adding 9/4 inside the parentheses. And I normally subtract it from outside the parentheses. Still with me?
2.
When you take something, you have a question?
Yeah, 2 is a setback. Right?
Yep. So when you take, wait, what do you mean? The divided by 2? Yes. When you normally take, when you take a number out on the front, before you can subtract that thing from the outside, you have to account for the fact that this would have been distributed in here, which means I take this and I multiply it by the negative 9/4, before I combine it with the 5. So 2 times negative 9/4 becomes negative 9/2, and then that's what I'm going to subtract from the outside.
Why do you make it negative?
Because if we add inside the parentheses, we subtract from outside the parentheses. We have to balance. This is all happening on one side of the equation, so that's how you balance it. If we were working both sides of the equation, I would have added to both sides of the equation, right? But because we want the left side to stay f of x, we have to add inside the parentheses and subtract outside the parentheses. So I'm going to rewrite this. This is now 2x squared plus 3x plus 9/4. And then 5 becomes 10 over 2. 10 over 2 minus 9 over 2 is 1/2. So now I'm here. And then the last thing you want to do is factor what's inside the parentheses. We've just made it a perfect square. The 2 stays on the front. The shortcut is square root the first term, square root the last term, take the sign from the middle, put it in the parentheses and square it, and don't forget your 1/2 at the end. So if I was to then graph this, I would get my vertex, negative 3/2 and 1/2, okay? And then I would plot some additional points or find my intercepts. This was one of the examples which we did by doing negative b over 2a. We're going to work it out using complete the square. Okay? Same first step. So f of x would equal negative x squared minus 3x. I'm going to find that, what goes there, bump the 7 to the outside. This time, what's in front of the x squared? A negative. So I've taken a negative 1. So negative 1 x squared, and it changes the 3x as well. Leave the space. Put the parentheses. Plus 7. Now I need to find what goes in that space. So I take the 3, divide it by 2, square it. Again, it's 9/4. I'm going to add that here. And I would normally subtract it from the 9/7, from the 7. But because I took a negative 1 out, I have to multiply that negative 1 by the 9/4 first. What happens? It becomes positive. So this time I'm actually going to add 9/4 to the 7 instead of subtracting it. So I end up with negative x squared plus 3x plus 9/4. 7 would be 28 over 4. So this is 37/4. And and then I factor. So f of x equals negative square root of the first term, square root of the last term, sign from the middle, put it in the parentheses and square it, plus 37 over 4. And if you look back on this example in the notes, our vertex was negative 3/2 and 37/4. This is a parabola that opens downward, and it would pass through that vertex. I mean, it would hit that vertex. Questions on that one? The first thing you got to do is group the first two terms together. So negative 3x squared plus 2x, leave that space, plus 5 goes to the outside. If there's a number on the front, I've got to take it out. So that I get negative 3 on the outside, which means I divide both this and this by negative 3. And I get x squared minus 2/3 x, leave the space, plus 5. Now I got to figure out what my c term should be. So I take b, which is 2/3, divide it by 2, which is the same thing as multiplying it by 1/2. That becomes 1/9.
Is it a negative 1/9?
Nope, that becomes 1/3. Sorry. Yeah, but you're already squaring it. So it doesn't matter if it's positive or negative because you're always squaring it. Does that make sense?
Okay.
You can make it negative if you want to, but at the end you're going to square it anyways.
Alright.
So that's what I'm adding inside the parentheses, and that's what I normally would subtract from outside the parentheses to balance that equation. With me so far? Okay. So now, because I took a number out of the front, I have to, because that number would get distributed into the 1/9, so it should impact the other 1/9. So I'm going to multiply it by what's getting subtracted from that c term that we bumped to the outside. And from here, this now becomes a positive 1/3. So now I've got negative 3x squared minus 2/3 x plus 1/9, and then positive 5 plus a positive 1/3 is plus 5 and 1/3. They may not always be that pretty. You might have to find a least common denominator and add them together. So then my last step is to factor what's inside the parentheses. The whole goal there was to make that a perfect square trinomial. So when I square root the first term, I square root the last term, I take the sign from the middle, which is that negative 2/3, put it in parentheses and square it, plus 5 and 1/3, which can also be written as negative 3x minus 1/3 squared plus 16/3. Either of these is fine. Both of those would be right. As long as it can't be simplified, I'll take either answer. Don't forget your f of x, because that's important to a function. And don't forget your squared. So then when you get to your second question on your quiz and it says just to graph the parabola, you can choose, do you want to force it into standard form, which would be like this, and then I can quickly get my vertex, right, because it would be 1/3 and 16/3. And then I can get my intercepts from there by setting it equal to 0 and using my even root property. Or you can use factoring negative b over 2a. It's totally up to you how you do it. Just make sure you know how to do one or the other. Isa.
If there's just a negative in front of the x in the beginning, do you do the same thing?
Yep.